Hey, welcome back. Pedram Shojai, the Urban Monk, hanging out in studio before 8-day vacation. Yeah, this guy gets to go on vacation. It's kind of nice. We're gonna head off to a ranch with a friend of mine, a few families, and let the kids just like run around in the river and get dirty and do what kids are supposed to do, which is be out in nature. And so I'm super excited about it. I got one solid day in studio. Was working with Mark Hyman and his crew this morning for his docu-series coming in, and then JJ Virgin was here, and now I have the privilege of being on my set with my guests for a couple stories that I wanted to share with you before I cut out and left town. We have a lot of conversation happening around our campfire around science and spirituality and how those things come together. We live in a very interesting era, right? It used to be do as I say as I do, I'm the master, this is how we've done it for years, just shut up and do it, right? And that traditional kind of lineage holder path has worked for many, for a lot it has not worked out so well, and we've kind of entered a new era. And then we're in the era of what the bleep do we know, and quantum physics can answer everything, and kind of went a little bit further on a pendulum swing that was a little too woo-woo, trying to spiritualize quantum physics. And somewhere in the middle is this really interesting space where medical science is really starting to find spiritual states and really understand spirituality and really find a sweet spot for where it's been missing in our lives. And so my guest today, Anna Yusim, has been working with patients in this capacity for a long time. Doctor from Yale, knows her stuff, has been working really in a counseling setting, but bringing these conversations in and really finding a science of spirituality that's helping people, and using kind of data-driven stuff to make these decisions so it's like the best of the woo-woo, put together in a way that can really help people. So I love this conversation, and I'm happy to be here. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Pedram. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, so how did you start looking at spirituality when you were working in your clinical practice? Like, where did spirituality come in?
Yeah, so spirituality actually came into my life during my medical training, and it came in more as part of my personal journey. I, did my training at Stanford University for undergrad, Yale Medical School, and I was doing, everything that you were supposed to do to become a doctor. And then my own life hit a little bump in the road. I encountered my own dark night of the soul. And I was looking to all of my healing tools that I had under my belt and that I'd accumulated over all these years, but I found them somehow lacking in some ways. And that's what started me on the quest to really look, okay, here's the limitations of what I've learned. I am, doing my psychiatry residency, so why can't I heal myself? And that took me to ashrams in India and working with shamans in South America and South Africa, and starting to study Kabbalah and starting to really understand more about the concept of soul. And in that, I found my own healing and eventually integrated it into my work with patients.
Good for you. One of the biggest challenges I saw with the kind of medical model when I was pre-med at UCLA was it was one of those meat grinders where it's just like you take these well-intentioned people that want to help the world and you put them through one of the most obnoxious routines known to humanity and keep them up for days on end, and then basically take away the one thing that they're supposed to represent, which is health, and then have them resent their patients when their patients come in and talk about their vacations and stuff. And so you actually were able to press pause on that and go learn how to take care of yourself, which is actually kind of rare in the medical profession because most people just suck it up and work through it, and then basically are, somewhat broken on the other side, and then hopefully, on the other side of retirement can, golf it off. But that obviously we know that doesn't work, right?
Absolutely. And I guess I got lucky. I broke early and I was forced to have to find this. I didn't get to the point where I burned out, or, physician burnout is such an issue. And it happened early on in my life where I was then forced to, okay, this isn't working, so what is? Right. You either can fall or you have to find another way that works. So, but absolutely.
Yeah, so psychiatry, that's a whole thing, right? Like psychiatry uses pharmacological agents predominantly. Most psychiatrists I know are dispensing drugs, not spending as much time in counseling and, or just kind of in the rat race of the medical model. So how do you bring shamanistic qualities and Kabbalah and all these things into a psychiatric practice? Is it a lot of counseling? Is it a lot of homework? How does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the first thing that you talked about is the role of medications in all this, because medications is part of the psychiatric profession, and there are indeed psychiatrists who prescribe predominantly medications. In my practice, about 50% of the patients I treat are on medications, which is a fairly low percentage for a psychiatrist. And the rest of my patients, it's only therapy. And it's really interesting because for some people, medications I feel are a lifeline without which, sure, they could have gotten to where they needed to get to, but it would have been much, much more difficult, and it would have taken much longer time. And in order to avoid pain and suffering in some ways, the medication helped them, but they're only the first step. Because the things with medication is they just treat the symptoms. They don't treat the root cause of the problem. And that's where I think my approach is unique, in that I believe in general that the majority of symptoms that people come to me with are being disconnected from your soul in some way. And it's in that disconnection that the void is created and that the problems lie. And part of our work is to help people reconnect.
Holy shit, that's like medical blasphemy right there. You're talking about souls.
Totally.
Yeah, you're talking about souls. That's like, you're a witch, right? Like that is such like a departure from where traditional psychology and its kind of mechanistic psychiatry and its mechanistic understanding of, certain types of disorders. And obviously this is a serotonin, issue, and let's reuptake this and all that. When you start talking about this other dimension of soul, do you get like a deer in headlights reaction at first from people, or are they just like, oh, how refreshing, please, right? Like, how does that work in your practice?
Absolutely, and it's very much both. There are some people where the idea of soul, they're not interested, it's not the way they think about things, but even often that is semantics, because soul is really about connecting to your authenticity. And if the word soul doesn't resonate, the word authenticity generally does. But it's actually interesting. A lot of patients, they come in, even though it was never advertised that I had this spiritual, interest or approach, they really, really wanted and needed that spiritual dimension, which I only found as I've been, was working with them for some time.
So what is the science of this? Like, so look, anyone can say, go to a shaman and get get yourself buried and extract your so-and-so or whatever. And these are all tried, and I'm not trying to be flippant, because these are all tried and true lineages, so long as you're not working with a monkey, right, that have been working for thousands of years. How does this get incorporated into a psychiatric practice?
Right, and what's the evidence base for this?
Right.
And this is something that's interesting, like, where is spiritually based care? Where's the majority of the evidence? It's in two parts of medicine, or it's number one, addiction, and number two, hospice care. Those are two parts of medicine where the standard medical treatment is primarily a spiritual based approach. Hospice care incorporating the spiritual dimension as people pass on and transition, and then AA and other models being really spiritually based models, even though there are now more agnostic AA and things like that as well. The rest of medicine is really catching up, but more and more studies are being done to validate and incorporate the importance of spirituality and healing.
So AA in this 12-step program is using a foundation of a higher power, and in all the narrative that AA is kind of worked with, and all of like the spin-offs of AA. So we have learned from this that basically we don't know what it's doing, but we've learned from this that it's efficacious. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly it. Like, what's the mechanism through which spirituality works? It's interesting. What's the mechanism through which a lot of medicines work? Even though maybe there's a little bit more known, a lot of it really is unknown. It's just seen by cause and effect that often they work. And so with spirituality, it's actually quite controversial. There's a lot of studies, going back and forth with prayer studies, etc. But certainly there's something that seems to really be there, and people who have a spiritual connection, it helps them to heal. Some people even have miraculous recoveries. And then there's the placebo effect, the power of the mind in creating treatment. So much of a medicinal effect truly is the placebo effect. It's a very real effect.
So a lot of the research on pharmacological agents that I'd seen showed them barely eking over placebo. And that's when they they factor out poor placebo responders. Basically, they want someone who basically confirms that they don't believe in anything, they don't believe anything's going to help them, and then they put those people into the studies. And still, placebo and some of these drugs are kind of almost on par. The drugs barely outperform placebo. So, everyone talks about, well, that's placebo. Let's talk about placebo. Like, how does one leverage that for their own personal gain in a way that's actually going to, move the needle?
Yeah, I mean, for my patients, they often ask, is this a real effect? Is this placebo? And I say, you know what? The placebo is a real effect. It actually leads to healing. People get better. Placebo effect is a part of every single, medication mechanism. And so it's not something what we discount, but what it actually shows us is the power of our mind to heal ourselves.
Yep.
And then there's placebo's evil twin, the nocebo effect, which is the opposite, which manifests in a practice where no matter what medication you're giving a patient, nothing ever works. And often that patient will come in with side effects that, are the strangest side effects that really aren't written on any of the labels. And often, just like the placebo effect is this belief that you're being given something and then there's an intention of healing. You're intending to heal. The nocebo effect is often from a deeply held unconscious belief that somehow nothing's ever going to heal you or the world is going to hurt you. You're going to be hurt by the world. And so that's projected onto a medication. And these are the people for whom no medication ever works, or it'll work for a little bit and then stop working, or it'll work but then suddenly the side effects over and over and over, no matter what medication, will become too much.
Yep. So where's the research on capacitating placebo and flattening nocebo? I mean, is it the hypnotherapists? I mean, who the hell is working on these kind of core belief systems and how to manage them in a way? And I guess there's a whole personal development industry that's spun out of this, right? But like in the medical world, is there anyone really looking at how to use evidence-based approaches to gaming placebo and bringing down nocebo?
I think, that's a great question. And I think one of the people who's really devoted a lot of her career to this is Lissa Rankin, who wrote Mind Over Medicine, which really was about placebo and nocebo and looked at the way in which our minds and other parts of healing that weren't just medicinal and hospital-based are involved.
Yep. She's done some great work in that space. It just seems like that is a challenging space because there's nothing to patent. There's nothing to refill bottles on, and so the financial model around placebo is really it's too free, right? It just doesn't work.
That's the problem, exactly right. If there's nothing to market, what's the point, right? If the answer is too simple, it often gets overlooked. But often, some of the solutions to our biggest problems actually are quite simple.
Yep. And what's funny is, we go in with complicated problems, expecting complicated solution sets, never really thinking that maybe the solution set to a complicated problem is simplicity, right? It's like, I need the right cocktail of, these 19 drugs to undo my mommy issues. And maybe you just need to spend some more time with yourself and your daughter or whatever that is. So now people come in, you're in the New York area. Is your practice in the New York area?
Exactly, Upper East Side, Manhattan.
All right, so you're in the belly of the beast. So you've got Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, and all sorts of people coming at you. Do you have a roadmap for different trails up the mountain so that you can ride in on kind of current belief systems and leverage what you've got with someone who has a kind of historical religious background?
Absolutely right. And so the very first thing whenever a patient comes is in taking my full history with all their medical and psychological background, also taking a spiritual history. And that's different for everybody. And I have plenty of patients who are atheists, but it's interesting, atheism does not make you a non-spiritual person. I have plenty of patients who are atheists, but very, very spiritual. And their spirituality comes from being connected to something greater, being out in nature, being in a state of flow, doing work they found meaningful, all those things that connect them to the deepest part of themselves and to the greater whole. And so that's very much a part of every evaluation.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, it's interesting because that's not a conversation that's welcome in most medical practices, right? It's like, you know what, go, don't talk to me about this stuff. Like I can't touch it. It's too woo woo, and it's the core of who we are. It's the core of our identities culturally for thousands of years. It's how society was kind of held together, and now that things have come unraveled, it's like I think it's a baby bathwater scenario. So I'm glad you're retrieving a lot of it and bringing it back. How do you leverage it now? So, someone comes in, let's just say they have some bipolar disorder and they have, some history of abuse and all these kinds of things. They probably started on medication. What would be the algorithm to really start shifting and turning this thing around into your methodology?
Right, and so it's a two-tier approach, just like you said. The first is the medical evaluation, where you employ all the traditional medical techniques, and if it is indeed something that requires medication, then we help the patient, we choose the medication, and sometimes it's really a choice whether the patient wants to do medication or not. The only time I say to a patient you need a higher level of care, being medication or to be hospitalized, is with chronic suicidality, or a suicidality that really they have some intent or plan, or where therapy alone is insufficient. But oftentimes people have a choice. Medication could be a faster solution for some people, perhaps a more thorough solution if they've already tried so many things. But then there's this other tier, and that's looking at all the psychological and spiritual factors. And part of looking also at the spiritual factors is recognizing that they're not in this alone, recognizing that there is something greater that could be a very important part of their healing if properly leveraged. And that's what I also do with patients often in my own practice.
That's the part that has really gone unspoken, which is sad, right? Is, that kind of holistic piece that needs to be leveraged. Grandma might have had spirituality, grandpa, had a bad experience, and there's so many histories and narratives that have driven people away from religion and alienated them from spirituality, right? And those two are not the same predominantly. Like, do you have a trans-religious doctrine of spirituality that you kind of abide by, that you can kind of pass muster with most people?
Yeah. Rather than saying God, and some people believe in God, you can say the universe. And the universe is God, the interconnectedness of all things. Rather than saying God, you can say the light. It's something that everyone can connect to and understand. But God, for some people, has a bad rap. It doesn't work.
Yep. Yeah, it's God. God's gotten a bad name. Out there with a lot of the noise that's happened. There's been a lot of people killing in the name of God, which really crowds the space. But look, the space in the heart. I remember I was hanging out with Larry Dosey a while back at something in New Mexico, and he really pioneered a lot of that power of prayer work, and really looking at what prayer does physiologically. And it was compelling. Like there was a lot of very interesting results coming out of just using prayer for health. I mean, is that part of the body of work that you're drawing on here?
Absolutely, right. And I often will pray together with my patients. I'll have patients pray for the people in their lives who they want to change, especially with couples. Like, for instance, how that could be leveraged is often, if a couple comes with issues, they want the other person to change in some way, and vice versa. And first, we could have them create an intention of what they see their partner's greatest potential as being, and really kind of holding that space for them and helping to pray for the partner's highest good to be able to be the biggest version of themselves. And this is not as a form of control. I want you to be this way. It's actually being able to help your partner harness their own personal power and grow as a person. And that also could be used for one's own healing and one's own growth.
So how does that work for one's own? I mean, look, it's nice to be prayed for, which is great, right? Please, everyone, pray. Pray for me. This is wonderful. I'll take it. Nice. Right? Yes, thank you. So, but like the act of praying, that's a really interesting kind of quantum space, if you will, in you allowing yourself to bridge across and care for another, and that doing something for you. So it's like a selfless, selfish act in a way.
Right. And it's an act that often with a patient, if a patient's open to that, because certainly not everyone wants the doctor praying for them, but sometimes if it's a part of a patient's own lexicon, it's something we do together, and it has intentionality, it has interconnectedness, it has something greater than both of us involved, and it really leverages a healing capacity that I feel neither of us could tap into on our own. I feel that there is something greater, which is why there's miracles with healings all the time. People call it miracles, but actually if you look around, they're happening all the time to a lot of people.
Yep. And quantifying it is the hard part. Trying to understand it is the hard part. And because we can't, quantify the methodology or all this kind of stuff, it's like, well, that bah humbug, like that just doesn't work. But it's been working for, all of human history. And it's kind of the core of how it's, we've kept us like, for me, I always had a comfort in knowing that my, kind of crazy old grandma was always just sitting there praying for us, right? Like even when she had Alzheimer's, she was just sitting there praying. Right? Yeah. And you're like, oh, that's cool. Someone's got my back. Like, thank you.
Exactly. And I actually know some atheists who say they're atheists, but they find comfort in the fact that some of their patients pray for them. It's kind of like their belief system is one way, but there's something just in case. And that's kind of this idea of Pascal's wager, right? So Blaise Pascal, the 17th century mathematician, basically said, the idea of belief is, if you believe in you're right, you gain the world. You gain so much. If you believe in you're wrong, nothing really changes. So it kind of rationally pays to believe. So why not believe?
So there are parts of the brain that are being triggered by some of these belief systems, and so there seems to be some really interesting research coming out. Can we jump into some of that? Because it's really interesting that people who believe are now accessing different parts of consciousness that are actually useful, and crossing that bridge it's a leap of faith in a lot of ways, but it works for us.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's really just amazing. I mean, in my books, I have a chapter really on consciousness and what is consciousness and how does belief play into that. Some people believe it resides in the brain, but actually the new ideas about consciousness having to do more with quantum physics as opposed to Newtonian physics is that consciousness doesn't reside in our brain. Our brain is just a filter for a much greater reality. Consciousness isn't in here, it's actually everywhere. And so in a way, what you're talking about is actually using belief as a way of connecting to everything that is, leveraging our consciousness to be connected to everybody and everything.
What's interesting is the conversation around metaphor and technology has always been fascinating to me. It's like, in Newton's time, it was like everything worked like a clock, right? Like everything was gears and mechanical clocks. And then like, all of a sudden all these metaphors became around like steam engines and like, the flow of all that. And it seems like our narrative around metaphor with technology has shifted to the point where like you could now say, well, think of it as like cloud computing, right? Like it's in the cloud. It's not located here. It's located everywhere. And like we've created a technology kind of backdrop to then be able to have a conversation about the internal state, which wasn't there before, as now we're starting to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my chapters on the chapter of consciousness. There's this idea of the field, and Lynn McTaggart wrote a brilliant book entitled The Field. And it's this idea that, consciousness doesn't just reside in the brain, just like I said, but actually is something much greater. And we as human beings can tap into that field for creativity, for access to universal consciousness, and often for healing. And there's some amazing examples of people throughout history. Like there was a mathematician, Ramanujan, who was a mathematician from India, who only lived 33 years. But he was a self-taught math prodigy. And in his 33 years, having no formal education, he was able to deduce and write 3,900 mathematical formulas. And he saw this information come to him as scrolls, which he thought were, the thoughts of God. And he eventually was discovered by British mathematician G.H. Hardy, taken to Great Britain and given a formal education. But this is something he's considered the most innately brilliant mathematician that ever lived. And how did this man with no formal education have this, what was he tapping into? What was he getting? And, other forms of this are this idea of multiple discovery, where oftentimes people on multiple, sides of the world will discover the same thing at the same time. Certainly you can say, is this, pure coincidence because people exposed to the same, information that exists could come to the same conclusions? Or is it actually something more? Are people tapping into something? And, there's always this idea, even in business, that the next big idea is out there. You better find it first. So there's almost like this greater consciousness that we're tapping into for our creativity, for our ideas, and it's very interesting.
So it's really refreshing because, there's certain places where conversations like this are very normal and like sanctioned and really kind of, leveraged to create, 5-day retreat and like, all sorts of things where you really tap into this and then you go back and you're better at work or, whatever it is, and you've really leveraged it, but you did like your thing. And now you're back in your real world. And I feel like, we've all just been kind of spiritual apologists in the real world because like, your storefront can't talk about this stuff because it's like, it's not serious enough. And the fact that those walls are crumbling down and this type of conversation is coming through like, a psychiatric office, and it's coming through people who, have now started to break ranks with that traditional model and realize that there's better ways to help people. I think it's really refreshing, right? And so, you're just doing your job better by leveraging tools that have been available to us for a long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what I say, that part of my goal is to put the idea of soul back into the medical literature and to help people really reconnect with who they really are and to use these ideas which have been around since the age of time and are used, just like you said, by so many other traditions all over the world for healing, to bring them into Western medicine and eventually create the evidence base necessary to really use that in the healing of patients.
Yeah. What's funny is when I started getting into all my kind of training, one of the things that really, upset me when people would come up and kind of try to talk to me about stuff, and it's like, oh, you're a new age guy. And I'd stop them right there and be like, oh, hell no. Do not,
no way.
Do not, like, I come from a 5,000-year-old Kung Fu tradition where everything has withstood the test of time and has been pressure tested in the consciousness of every adept that's been passing it on through and through, and this has been handed on in a lineage. And so this is evidence-based through generations of humans that has now, worked its way into this body of knowledge that I'm sitting on. Don't you fucking call that new age, right? And so, like, I think that there's a lot there in going back to what we know works and then using the research, and the methodology we have now to study the efficacy. And I think that has been really rewarding, whereas some of this new age stuff, it's not. I had a guy tell me he came up with his methodology in the shower one day. He just like made it up and started selling it to people. I'm like, that's new age. That's new age. That's bullshit, right? Like, you can't pull stuff out of your ass. Like, what is it, right? And so, going back to Kabbalah, going back to, meditation, going back to, forms of prayer, these things have been around forever, right? They won't last the test of time if they don't work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I think doctors are increasingly using them. And it's so interesting how you said that someone was in the shower and they pulled this thing out. I feel like that actually happens to people more and more, and especially people in my profession, because so much of the work, since we're talking to people constantly, what comes into our mind isn't just rational things. There's so much intuition involved. And I've had, and I write about this in my book, in the chapter on interconnectedness, times when something has come out of my mouth, which made absolutely no sense to me at all. I'm like, why did I just say that? And then it led to a huge breakthrough for the patient. It was almost like something came through me as opposed to it was a premeditated response. Yes. And it turns out when I started reviewing the literature about this, a number of my colleagues have had similar experiences. And Janine DePayer here in New York City put together an article for I think it was for Psychoanalytic Dialogues. It was called Uncanny Communications in the Porous Mind, of 22 cited studies of this. Of things coming through people as opposed to being premeditated, said things.
So how do you explain that off in the psychiatric kind of lingo? I mean, we're talking about like Jungian, like collective unconscious. Like, how do you turn that into science?
Absolutely. So Sigmund Freud experienced this a lot with patients. He called it thought transference or telepathy. And it's something that, when you're sitting with someone and you're very close to them and you see them every week or more, you get very embedded in the nuances of their inner world, and they get embedded into the nuances of your inner world. So there's a kind of communication that happens outside the normal channels, outside the regular communication, body language, etc. Something else gets passed. And I've also had in my practice numerous experiences where patients have had dreams about things that have happened to me that they could have, not known at all, or where I have had a dream about patients of things that happened to them that I had no way of knowing. It's like we're somehow connected in deeper ways. And actually, the opening case in my book is about that. That's actually what motivated me to really write this book. I was on a trip in the Ukraine, 5,000 miles away from my practice. And I woke up in the middle of the night in a start. I'm not one for panic attacks, never had panic attacks, but this was like a midnight panic attack. And patients had described these before. I'd never had this, but something definitely was wrong, and I had no idea what was going on. And I was compelled to check my email, and I realized that 1 second prior, a patient contacted me that he was suicidal. And because I had gotten up at that exact time, I was able to call my patient from 5,000 miles away, intervene, and we were able to kind of talk things through and work things out. And I describe it in much more detail in my book, but that to me was really the shocking thing. Like, how in the world, what happened? Was that purely coincidence? How did I wake up knowing something was so wrong? And then, by virtue of being awoken, then I, was able to intervene. And what if I hadn't awoken?
That's amazing. That's amazing. And that's not a standalone story. I mean, I think everyone I know has had some experience of that at some point in their lives. Different magnitude or whatever, but like, someone's there, you got to call somebody, like these things that kind of these transpersonal things that can't be explained. One of the kind of hallmarks of good science is to say, okay, well, if I have a hypothesis and now there's evidence to suggest that no longer fits, I need to formulate a new hypothesis. And so, well, this obviously doesn't make sense. You're crazy. You're a witch. Or, whoa, this thing is way fucking bigger than we thought, and it's way more interesting, and we have a very, very kind of compartmentalized understanding of reality that we're just starting to kind of break out of. And so it's like the new science is about looking at all this and being like, wow, that is cool and that happens, so now we need to understand why.
Absolutely, completely agreed. And I feel like, this is these sorts of things, like when you think about someone and they call, or you haven't heard from someone in ages and they come into your mind and then you bump into them on the street. These are little synchronicities. And Carl Jung actually wrote about them. And he wrote that synchronicities are indicative of a greater order of the universe. And it's not just, this random coincidence. It's really about the subjective meaning that we attribute to that coincidence. And by virtue of it being meaningful, it's, these two events that we give meaning to, that's a synchronicity, and really, could help to be a source of guidance in one's life.
Amazing. One of the, and we're running out of time, but I really want to get into this last bit, is, one of the really interesting bits that, Kabbalah really touches in on, and all the spiritual traditions, once you kind of get in, touch in on, is the kind of linguistics and the kind of confinement to language and understanding of like experience through language, which is like 6 or 7 like times removed from like the feeling and the raw emotion and just the reality of what the experience is. How do you work through that in your psychiatric practice when you just, you want to get elemental and get out of the head and get out of the words, which just can't do things justice?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, because my work ultimately is talking to people all day long. My whole world is language. Everything is language. The way that we, interchange with patients is all about language. Yep. But sometimes if someone happens to intellectualize, or if somebody who already is very cerebral, for them the best thing is actually to go into their heart as opposed to into their head, or into their gut, or into their body in some way. And so part of my practice is really to teach people to do that too. And in my book, I give a lot of exercises of how people could reconnect to their heart, of meditation techniques, of being able to connect to your senses and use that as a way of harnessing your personal power. For others, language is a powerful way of self-expression and of releasing emotions. So it really depends on the person, but it can very much be both.
Yeah. Some people could do with language what an artist can do with clay or with paint. Some people are very good at conveying through language, and others just drop the ball, especially if English is your second language. And it just depends on your ability to be able to get out of the way and let the language not be kind of a dampener or create inertia in what you're doing. And so, for a person whose career is kind of oriented around talking, it's such a weird thing when you're talking about spiritual principles, that really the undercurrent of what's happening below that kind of lingual level is where the healing is happening, and the words are almost filling the space. And so you got to kind of honor the silence and all these things that we've learned from the spiritual traditions in order to kind of encapsulate that in a lesson that they'll get. So it's not easy. I mean, people come to you to talk.
Mm-hmm. Right. People come to heal, and sometimes we find after talking that it's been too much talking, that there's something much deeper. And then other people, it's not about talking or feeling, it's about action, taking action in this world. Like for some people, they can talk, but if they don't take action specifically to change their life, nothing's going to shift.
Yep. So the book is called Fulfilled by Dr. Anna Yusim, and I am a big fan of the work that you're doing. I think that this is the bleeding edge of where medicine is going to be able to become a lot more helpful for real people, right? It's interesting to talk about people as cases, but real people come with spiritual traditions. Real people come with all kinds of things that need to kind of be unpacked and decoded and worked through a language that has been with us in this kind of transpersonal communication style that's been with us since tribal days, right? So I'm really happy to see this conversation happening, and I commend you on doing the work. The book is available very shortly, so please go check it out. And if this is the subject matter that is interesting to you, get in the book, read the book, share the book. This is how we get better, is by understanding more and being able to help people in our lives with this. So I wish you the best with all of it. I really enjoy your energy, and I think that your patients are very privileged to be able to see someone like you. So keep up the good work, and I hope you inspire more psychiatrists to kind of take this turn and start waking up to this.
Thank you so much, Pedram. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next show.